Have you ever apologized and immediately noticed people treating you differently? Maybe they questioned your decisions, doubted your authority, or even tried to take advantage of you. What if I told you that this polite habit of apologizing, repeated over time, slowly erodes your influence, your power, and the fear and respect you command? Today, we're going to reveal Machiavelli's secret rule, why the truly powerful never apologize, and how you can harness this brutal strategy to remain unshakable. In life and leadership, there is one action that can quietly destroy your power, and it's something most people consider polite, even noble. It's a single word you say when things go wrong, the word sorry. Today, we explore the brutal truth about apologies and why, according to Machiavelli, saying sorry may cost you more than you realize. When one examines the nature of power, it becomes clear that strength is not measured merely by the armies you command or the wealth you possess, but by the perception you cultivate in the minds of others. In the theater of influence, every action, every word, every gesture conveys a message, and nothing speaks more loudly, more vulnerably, than the act of apologizing. To apologize is to reveal a crack in your armor, a fissure in your carefully constructed image of authority. It is to admit that you are capable of error, that your decisions may falter, that you can be challenged and perhaps even defeated. Machiavelli, in his unflinching analysis of power, would insist that such admissions are dangerous. They are not signs of virtue, they are weapons in the hands of your adversaries. Consider the leader who habitually apologizes. To his subordinates he appears uncertain. Decisions that should be absolute become open to debate. Every command he issues is subject to questioning because he has trained those around him to believe that he is fallible, and more dangerously, that he regrets being fallible. In this environment, loyalty is fragile, respect is conditional, and fear, the quiet but crucial engine of obedience, begins to dissipate. The apology, seemingly innocent and polite, is a signal. It whispers to those who watch closely, here is a man who can be manipulated. Here is a man who can be swayed by guilt or flattery. Here is a man who is not unassailable. Machiavelli understood human nature with ruthless clarity. People are drawn to power not because it is fair, not because it is kind, but because it is strong. Strength commands attention, respect, and fear. Weakness, even disguised as humility, invites exploitation. When a ruler apologizes, he undermines this fundamental principle. He tells the world, even unintentionally, that his authority is negotiable, that his decisions are revisable, and that he is subject to moral scrutiny in ways that his position cannot tolerate. This is why, historically, leaders who are quick to apologize often lose more than they gain. They surrender the quiet psychological edge that allows them to maintain control. The danger is amplified when one considers the subtle art of influence. Apologies do not exist in a vacuum. They are a form of communication, a tool that conveys meaning beyond the words themselves. A leader who apologizes conveys vulnerability. Vulnerability is contagious, and in the intricate dance of power, it attracts predators. Those who seek advantage watch for these moments. They observe the cracks in demeanor, the hesitations in tone, the willingness to concede. They do not respect the apology for its ethical weight. They respect it for what it reveals about the speaker's position in the hierarchy of power. To illustrate, imagine a general commanding an army in a crucial campaign. He makes a tactical error, and rather than recalibrating the strategy with decisiveness, he issues a public apology, acknowledging his mistake. Instantly, his lieutenants begin to question orders. Morale wavers, because those who follow him are now aware that he is fallible and willing to admit it publicly. Rival commanders, hearing of the apology, sense opportunity. They interpret the gesture not as courage or honesty, but as weakness. In the battlefield of perception, this apology has cost more than any tactical miscalculation could. The general has undermined his own authority, not through failure, but through acknowledgement of failure. Machiavelli would insist that in the realm of power, perception is reality. The external world judges you not by the intentions behind your actions, but by the consequences those actions signal. To apologize is to signal a loss of control, a surrender of decisiveness, and a willingness to subject oneself to judgment. Every apology echoes in the minds of observers, reinforcing the idea that authority is not absolute, that the leader is not untouchable, that boundaries can be tested, and once that precedent is set, it is difficult, if not impossible, to reclaim the unassailable position of strength. Moreover, the act of apologizing can be weaponized against the apologizer. Consider the intricate networks of influence in politics, business, or social hierarchies. When a powerful individual expresses regret for an action or decision, those who aspire to ascend immediately take note. They recognize that the apologizer is no longer immune to critique or manipulation. Subtle pressures are applied, deals are renegotiated, and loyalties are tested. Each subsequent interaction carries a silent question. If this leader apologized once, will he apologize again? Can we bend him to our advantage? The apology, therefore, becomes not an end to conflict, but a catalyst, a lever by which others may shift the balance of power in their favor. In this context, the modern notion of politeness or ethical transparency becomes a dangerous liability. Machiavelli teaches that in the calculus of power, the appearance of virtue is often more valuable than virtue itself. One may maintain the illusion of fairness, responsibility, or honesty without openly admitting fault. Apologies strip away this protective illusion. They replace the carefully cultivated perception of strength with an undeniable reality: the speaker is vulnerable, fallible, and accessible. In a world where every advantage must be safeguarded, such vulnerability is costly beyond measure. Even beyond immediate relationships, the habit of apologizing can ripple across entire networks of influence. Allies begin to question the judgment and reliability of the apologizer. Opponents sense weakness to exploit, and neutral parties reconsider alignment. Power is not merely the ability to act, but the ability to shape the expectations and perceptions of others. Every apology adjusts those expectations, tilting the balance towards scrutiny and away from respect. To apologize in this framework is to voluntarily shrink the sphere of authority, to invite interrogation, and to signal that one's position is not, in fact, unassailable. The lessons are clear for those who wish to command effectively. Apologies, while socially lauded as marks of humility or morality, are strategically fatal. They undermine authority, erode respect, and signal vulnerability in the theater of power. The truly powerful understand that strength is cultivated in perception first, action second. To preserve influence, to command loyalty, and to maintain fear where necessary, one must refrain from publicly acknowledging fault. Every word of regret chips away at the carefully constructed edifice of authority. Every apology opens a door for exploitation, and once the door is opened, the consequences extend far beyond the single moment of contrition, echoing through the corridors of influence and subtly reshaping the landscape of power itself. To understand the true danger of apologies, one must first look inward. Saying sorry is not merely a social gesture, it is a reflection of the inner state of the speaker, and in the realm of power, your inner state is inseparable from your external influence. Every apology carries with it a subtle, almost imperceptible transfer of authority. When you admit fault, even in the smallest way, your mind registers a defeat. This is not simply humility, it is a relinquishment of psychological dominance. Machiavelli would insist that a leader must command the battlefield of the mind as fiercely as any physical territory, and yet the act of apologizing quietly surrenders ground that cannot easily be reclaimed. Humans are conditioned to respect strength and fear weakness. This is a universal truth, observable from the smallest social interactions to the grand stage of political empires. When one apologizes, one signals vulnerability, and vulnerability is contagious. Others sense it instinctively and adjust their behavior accordingly. Subordinates who once followed without question begin to hesitate. Allies who respected your judgment now weigh every word against a newfound perception of fallibility. Enemies, ever watchful, perceive an opening and begin to probe it, testing limits, observing reactions, seeking further concessions. What begins as a moment of politeness transforms into a long-term erosion of psychological authority. The inner cost of apologizing is equally insidious. Each time you say "I'm sorry," you reinforce within your own mind the notion that your actions are inherently flawed, that your judgment is suspect. This self-doubt accumulates over time, creating hesitation in moments that demand decisiveness. Machiavelli would caution that leadership is not a game of intentions but of perception. If you hesitate, if you question yourself, if you publicly display contrition, you are no longer projecting the image of an unshakable figure. Your confidence falters, your decisiveness wavers, and even those who cannot articulate why they doubt you will feel it. The human mind is highly attuned to subtle cues of weakness, and once your internal confidence begins to erode, others will sense it and act accordingly. Apologies also shift the psychological balance between you and those around you. In any relationship, whether it is between a ruler and subjects, a manager and employees, or a competitor and a rival, power is rarely distributed equally. Every act of concession tilts the scales, often imperceptibly. By apologizing, you communicate that you recognize a hierarchy in which the other party holds moral leverage over you. They sense that they can induce regret, elicit contrition, and ultimately manipulate you. Even if the apology is warranted, even if it is socially expected, the cost is a subtle weakening of your psychological dominance. The mind begins to operate with a new set of boundaries, one in which fear of disapproval, anticipation of criticism, and concern for perception override strategic clarity. History offers countless examples of leaders undone by this very principle. The ruler who constantly seeks forgiveness finds that loyalty becomes conditional, trust becomes transactional, and fear, the silent but essential engine of obedience, erodes. Those who once followed blindly begin to test limits, probing to see how far they can push. A single apology sets a precedent, and precedent is a powerful force. It conditions minds to expect weakness, creating a long-term shift in the balance of influence. Machiavelli would remind us that those who can manipulate perception can manipulate reality. By apologizing, you teach others how to manipulate you. The psychological burden extends beyond external interactions. Apologizing trains the mind to associate errors with personal failure rather than strategic miscalculation. Instead of analyzing mistakes objectively and using them to recalibrate action, the leader who apologizes internalizes guilt. Each apology becomes a reinforcement of self-doubt, a cognitive anchor that slows decision-making and fosters anxiety. Where strength once manifested as certainty, it becomes hesitant and self-conscious. Where authority once commanded attention, it now invites scrutiny. The mind, once a weapon, becomes a liability, constrained by the invisible chains of regret. Furthermore, apologizing diminishes resilience, an essential trait for those who seek lasting influence. Resilience is not merely the ability to withstand external pressure, it is the capacity to maintain psychological composure in the face of challenge. By habitually admitting fault, one trains the mind to react reflexively to criticism, to anticipate judgment, and to assume moral inferiority. This reflexive mindset undermines strategic clarity. Decisions become filtered through the lens of potential social backlash rather than objective advantage. Machiavelli understood that in the corridors of power, hesitation is fatal. A leader must act decisively, project confidence, and maintain the unshakable perception of control. Apologies erode this foundation, replacing it with doubt, caution, and vulnerability. Even in modern contexts, the psychological cost remains potent. In workplaces, social networks, and personal relationships, habitual apologies communicate a weakness that others instinctively sense and exploit. Negotiations are skewed, influence is reduced, respect diminishes. And most dangerously, the mind begins to accept this reduced status as reality. Each apology reinforces the belief that authority is negotiable, that mistakes are unforgivable, and that personal power is limited. This internalized perception shapes behavior, often more profoundly than any external challenge. Machiavelli would insist that the mind is the first battlefield. Lose control there, and every other arena, from politics to personal affairs, becomes exponentially more difficult to dominate. In essence, the cost of saying sorry is far greater than the word itself. It is a transfer of power, a relinquishment of psychological territory, and a subtle conditioning of others to exploit weakness. Machiavelli teaches that to lead effectively, one must maintain a mental fortress, unyielding and resilient, projecting strength even in the face of error. The act of apology cracks this fortress, even momentarily, and every observer, ally, or adversary notices. Each concession reshapes the psychological landscape, altering perceptions, expectations, and influence. It is not merely a word, it is a tool of disempowerment, a weapon that others can wield against you, and a trap that ensnares your own mind in self-doubt, hesitation, and diminished authority. If apologies are the silent erosion of power, then strategy is the antidote. Machiavelli teaches that a leader must never submit to weakness. A true ruler, or any individual seeking influence, understands that mistakes are inevitable, but concession is optional. The question is not whether you will err, every human being does, but how you respond when error occurs. Apologies, as we have already examined, signal vulnerability, diminish authority, and invite manipulation. But there are alternatives, calculated maneuvers that preserve perception, maintain control, and even convert mistakes into demonstrations of strength. The first alternative is acknowledgement without concession. This is the art of admitting reality without admitting inferiority. To acknowledge a misstep is not to apologize, it is to recognize the fact, while simultaneously asserting command over the situation. Machiavelli would advise that leaders confront errors with clarity and precision, never allowing them to appear as moral failings. The goal is not to display humility, but to demonstrate awareness and control. By framing the acknowledgement strategically, the leader communicates competence, not weakness. The audience or opposition sees decisiveness, not guilt. The subtle difference between saying, "I recognize this issue and will address it immediately, and I am sorry for this mistake," is monumental. One preserves power, the other surrenders it. Reframing is another potent weapon in the Machiavellian toolkit. Mistakes, when reframed, become opportunities to assert authority. Instead of presenting an error as a personal fault, a leader can highlight external factors, contextualize the situation, or redefine the narrative to shift focus from failure to solution. Consider a corporate leader whose decision led to a financial setback. To apologize is to admit personal incompetence. To reframe is to say, "We faced unforeseen challenges, and here is how we are responding decisively." The action signals intelligence, resilience, and strategic foresight. Machiavelli would observe that perception is everything. Controlling the narrative allows you to convert potential criticism into evidence of capability. Decisive action is perhaps the most critical alternative. When a misstep occurs, the strongest response is not verbal concession but visible correction. Power is projected through action, not words, and a single display of effective problem-solving can erase the need for apology entirely. History is filled with leaders who, faced with failure, acted with swift, calculated moves that transformed mistakes into triumphs. A military commander who miscalculates a maneuver does not rush to apologize. He recalibrates, strikes with precision, and reasserts dominance. The world does not remember the error, it remembers the mastery of response. Machiavelli would insist that those who lead through action maintain the aura of unshakable authority, demonstrating that no mistake can destabilize them. Silence is also a strategic tool. Often, The greatest power is in saying nothing. The impulse to apologize is often a reaction to social pressure, to the discomfort of being perceived as flawed. Machiavelli understood that others will always read intentions through their own biases, and that words of apology are frequently interpreted as weakness, regardless of sincerity. By withholding the apology and instead focusing on controlled, deliberate action, a leader preserves authority and forces observers to measure competence by results, not expressions of remorse. Silence, in this sense, is not passive. It is a deliberate calculation, a refusal to surrender psychological territory. Moreover, symbolic acts can replace verbal apologies while preserving strength. Leaders can demonstrate accountability, competence, and resolve without admitting moral failure. A CEO facing criticism might implement a corrective initiative that visibly addresses the issue. A general might reposition forces to strengthen strategy after a misstep. A politician might take decisive policy measures that signal responsiveness. These actions communicate mastery and responsibility without the vulnerable concession of apology. Machiavelli would observe that the appearance of virtue, courage, and competence is often more important than the virtue itself. By acting decisively, the leader projects the illusion, and often the reality, of unassailable strength. Strategic alliances also play a role. When a leader faces potential backlash, one can leverage relationships, credibility, and influence to absorb or deflect the impact of mistakes. Machiavelli emphasizes that the wise ruler surrounds himself with loyal subordinates who respect authority, not moral expectation. Through alliances, loyalty, and controlled messaging, a leader can navigate errors without sacrificing dignity. Each move is calculated to preserve the psychological hierarchy: no apology, no concession, only mastery over perception and circumstance. In addition, preemptive framing of expectations is essential. Leaders can establish norms where mistakes are understood as part of strategic complexity rather than personal failure. By shaping the narrative in advance, the need to apologize diminishes. If subordinates, allies, and even rivals anticipate challenges and accept that errors do not imply weakness, the leader retains the commanding position. Machiavelli's insight is timeless. Power is maintained not only in acts of dominance, but in the anticipation of perception. Controlling expectations is a form of invisible authority that safeguards against the psychological cost of apology. Finally, the cumulative effect of these alternatives reinforces a central principle. True power is never humbled by error. Leaders who consistently respond to mistakes with acknowledgement, reframing, decisive action, strategic silence, symbolic demonstrations, alliances, and expectation management cultivate an image of resilience and unshakable command. Mistakes become instruments of perception, shaping the narrative in favor of authority rather than against it. Every observer, ally, and rival witnesses not failure but mastery, not weakness but control, not regret but decisive strategy. In this Machiavellian calculus, apology is unnecessary, redundant, and dangerous, while alternative strategies serve as the scaffolding upon which lasting power is built. The dangers of apology are not confined to a single moment of weakness. They compound over time, eroding influence in ways both subtle and profound. Machiavelli understood that authority is like a fortress. The walls may appear strong in a single day, but repeated small breaches weaken the entire structure. Each apology, no matter how minor or socially acceptable, functions as one such breach. And over time, these breaches accumulate into cracks that can destabilize even the most seemingly secure position. Those who habitually apologize teach the world, and themselves, that authority is negotiable, that decisions can be questioned, and that influence is conditional rather than absolute. In human relationships, consistency of perception is paramount. When a leader frequently apologizes, it conditions the observers, the subordinates, allies, rivals, and even the public to expect concessions. The repeated signal of remorse shifts the psychological balance, subtly reorienting power away from the speaker. Once a pattern is established, others adjust their behavior in ways that exploit this perceived vulnerability. Requests for favors become demands, critiques are amplified, challenges are more frequent. Every habitual apology trains the social environment to test limits, probe weaknesses, and erode respect. Machiavelli would note that those who seek to command must never allow patterns of vulnerability to develop, because patterns are easily exploited and nearly impossible to erase. The erosion of authority is especially insidious because it is largely invisible in the moment. When one apologizes once, it seems inconsequential, even virtuous. The world sees a man correcting an error, displaying humility. Yet the mind of every observer records the concession. It becomes a reference point for future interactions. The second apology reinforces the perception. The third strengthens it, and soon a reputation is formed not around competence or decisiveness, but around fallibility and readiness to yield. Over time, the once powerful figure finds that influence is no longer automatic but must be continually defended. Every decision becomes a negotiation, every action is scrutinized. The fortress of authority has been undermined brick by brick. Consider how this plays out in leadership contexts. In organizations, habitual apologies reduce confidence in decision-making. Subordinates begin to question judgments before they are executed. Allies hesitate to support initiatives, anticipating potential missteps. Rivals exploit the pattern, maneuvering aggressively, knowing that hesitation, doubt, or apology will follow. In political arenas, the cost is even greater. A public figure who repeatedly apologizes sets a precedent that the electorate and opponents can manipulate. Public perception shifts subtly from respect to skepticism. Admiration turns to scrutiny. Fear of consequence diminishes. Machiavelli would insist that the appearance of strength is a currency more valuable than truth, and each apology devalues that currency. There is also a compounding psychological effect on the apologizer. Each habitual apology reinforces internalized doubt, diminishing confidence and decisiveness. The mind begins to associate leadership with moral compromise rather than strategic mastery. Decisions become filtered through the lens of potential regret, anticipated criticism, and fear of misjudgment. A leader who apologizes frequently is trapped in a cycle. Fear drives apology, apology erodes authority, eroded authority increases fear, and the cycle repeats. Over time, this pattern can cripple initiative, weaken resilience, and leave the individual psychologically ill-prepared to confront challenges. Machiavelli understood that power is as much about perception in the mind of the ruler as it is about the minds of others. To weaken the self is to weaken command. Long-term effects of over-apologizing extend even to the structure of alliances and relationships. Those who once respected authority begin to push boundaries, testing how far they can go before the next apology. Trust becomes conditional, loyalty must be continually earned, influence is never assumed. The habitual apologizer unwittingly sows seeds of exploitation and manipulation. Allies may support initiatives outwardly while secretly undermining authority, knowing that the leader's pattern of concession creates a predictable vulnerability. Rivals, observing these tendencies, develop strategies that exploit repetition. Machiavelli would argue that the appearance of invulnerability is central to deterrence. Habitual apology dissolves that deterrence, making strategic aggression easier and more frequent. Even culturally, habitual apologies create reputational liabilities. A single moment of contrition may be interpreted as noble or socially aware, but a series of apologies defines character in the eyes of observers. The world begins to see the apologizer not as wise or virtuous, but as hesitant, easily swayed, and incapable of commanding unwavering respect. In professional, political, or social arenas, this perception diminishes opportunities, influences negotiations, and shifts the trajectory of influence in subtle yet irreversible ways. Machiavelli understood that perception shapes reality. Once a leader is perceived as weak, the world interacts with them according to that perception, regardless of true intent or capability. Moreover, habitual apology fosters a culture in which challenge is normalized and authority is tested relentlessly. When one frequently yields through verbal concession, subordinates and allies are unconsciously trained to expect weakness. Future transgressions or disagreements are no longer met with measured respect or caution. They are met with probing, testing, and exploitation. Machiavelli's insight is timeless. Once the pattern is set, the individual loses the ability to recalibrate without substantial cost. The fortress of influence is no longer simply damaged, it is besieged, because the world knows exactly where the walls are weakest. Finally, over time, the cumulative effects of habitual apology reshape the leader's own behavior in profound ways. Decisions are filtered through fear of consequence, responses are calculated with the anticipation of criticism, and authority becomes conditional rather than inherent. Where once confidence projected inevitability, now hesitation breeds second-guessing. Where once action commanded respect, now caution invites skepticism. The social, psychological, and strategic costs of habitual apology accumulate relentlessly, corroding influence, destabilizing authority, and shifting the balance of power away from the individual who yields. In the theater of power, words carry weight far beyond their surface meaning. An apology, though seemingly polite, is a crack in the armor, a signal of vulnerability, and a tool that others will seize without hesitation. As we have seen, the act of saying sorry erodes authority immediately, chips away at psychological strength, and sets dangerous precedents that shape long-term perception. Each concession teaches subordinates, allies, and rivals how to exploit weakness, and over time, habitual apologies quietly dismantle influence and credibility. Machiavelli's insight is unflinching. Strength is preserved not through moral virtue or public humility, but through perception, decisiveness, and control. The truly powerful acknowledge mistakes without yielding to them, act with strategic precision instead of verbal contrition, and cultivate an image of unshakable command. They understand that influence is fragile and that every apology is a subtle transfer of power away from themselves. To lead effectively, one must master both the mind and the world around them, maintaining fear, respect, and unwavering authority at every turn. The brutal cost of apologies is not measured in a single interaction, but in the gradual erosion of control, the subtle reshaping of perception, and the cumulative weakening of influence. Those who understand this law of power act decisively, strategically, and without apology, transforming errors into opportunities to demonstrate mastery rather than weakness. The lesson is clear. In the realm of power, regret is a liability, apology is a trap, and the path to enduring authority lies in acting boldly, controlling perception, and never surrendering to the seductive illusion of moral concession. To embrace Machiavelli's rule is to step into a world where strength is absolute, mistakes are instruments of strategy, and respect is never demanded, it is commanded. The powerful do not apologize, they adapt, they dominate, they endure,